There's blood on the stairs, £3 stolen, precision lockpicks. In Flaxborough, Inspector Purbright discovers that small-town respectability hides surprising criminal ingenuity. Where are you listening from tonight? The borough assembly rooms of Flaxborough possessed that particular variety of municipal dignity which suggested civic pride tempered by a healthy respect for the ratepayer's purse. On this damp Thursday evening, the Improvement Society had gathered to receive enlightenment on traffic calming, the continental experience, from Councillor Lionel Harpole, who had spent a morning in Belgium and returned with the evangelical fervour of one who had witnessed painted road humps in their natural habitat. Councillor Harpole arranged his notes, kept in a folder marked Exports, Agricultural Machinery, which had enjoyed all the prestige of foreign travel without the bother of customs, and surveyed his audience with the satisfaction of a man about to bestow European wisdom upon provincial minds. The assembled worthies included Mrs. Tither from Church Row, self-appointed convener of social liaison, Mr. Delday, who sold stationery and harboured secret dreams of fluorescent bollards, and various other souls who believed that continental road management might somehow improve their Thursday evenings. Inspector Purbright occupied a chair toward the back, not from any enthusiasm for Belgian traffic philosophy, but because the chief constable had hinted that visible police interest in civic amenities might soften the blow of next year's precept. He observed the familiar ritual of municipal improvement with the patient attention of one whose profession had taught him that faces were often more instructive than voices. At precisely 7:30, Harpole rose and began his discourse on gradients, widths, and the psychological effects of coloured tarmac upon the continental motorist. The audience settled into that state of polite endurance which characterized Flaxborough's approach to edification. It was then that Mrs. Crampton, the assembly room's cleaner, a compact woman who believed that dirt, like sin, required vigorous personal engagement, entered at a speed inconsistent with her professional dignity. She paused, as if considering whether discretion might be preferable to duty, then announced in a voice that struck the picture rail, "There's blood on the stairs." The effect was immediate. Teacups paused halfway to lips, and the orchestra pit fund collecting tin, positioned hopefully near the fire exit, gave an undignified wobble. Councillor Harpole's pencil ceased its European trajectory. Purbright rose without demonstration, moving forward as the room parted with the gentle relief of those glad to transfer responsibility to someone else. "Where, Mrs. Crampton?" he inquired mildly. "On the back stairs, sir. Smears on the runner and the banister at the turn. Weren't there this afternoon when I cleaned. In the foyer, where municipal notices promised unlikely blessings to small businesses, Purbright found evidence of disturbance. The small table near the door displayed a bright half-circle where dust had been disturbed, and a length of chain ending in a torn twist. The orchestra pit fund tin had departed. The stair carpet bore thin, apologetic smears on its crimson wool. On the polished banister at the first turn, beneath the portrait of a gentleman who had once managed both brewery and hospital with equal efficiency, were darker marks, no more than a fingertip's worth. Purbright crouched slightly, preserving both knees and dignity. Beneath the expected carbolic scent, he detected something else, boot polish, perhaps the inexpensive kind that yields colour along with consolation. "Shall I scrub?" offered Mrs. Crampton with the hunger of one who had found a professional challenge. "Not yet, please," said Purbright. He examined the chain's padlock, opened or obliged rather than broken. The tin would have been light, its contents modest, yet someone had bled for it. Dr. Mortlake, summoned from the audience, confirmed what seemed obvious. Blood. Human. Fresh within the hour. He touched the stain with professional curiosity. Not much of it, but definitely recent. Returning to the hall, Purbright addressed the assembly with characteristic understatement. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask someone among us to help me. Would the person who cut their hand on the chain just now be so good as to show me their hand? One doesn't want tetanus for the sake of the orchestra pit." Heads turned with interest masquerading as concern. Pockets suddenly acquired fingers, cuffs were examined, wrists scratched. No hands emerged. "Very well," said Purbright. "Perhaps someone will think better of it and pay a private call at the station. Meanwhile, Councillor, I believe painted crossings will bear the strain." As Harpole resumed his continental wisdom, the whispering began, that careful distribution of surmise which served Flaxborough in place of evening entertainment. Someone had noticed Mr. Delday near the chain. Someone recalled disputes between the orchestra pit fund and the operatic society. The night grew more instructive by the minute. Purbright slipped a hand into his pocket, considering. The back stairs suggested discretion. The polish implied working boots. The modest amount of blood indicated surprise rather than violence. Most telling was the absence of any cry for help. Whoever had bled had departed quietly, probably unaware their injury was visible. As the meeting concluded and people ventured into the obliging rain, Mrs. Tither whispered confidentially, "It's that Delday. Always has his eyes on little things." "Does he?" said Purbright. "How very observant of him." He paused beneath the mayor's portrait, painted when mayors had possessed the decency to be merely ridiculous rather than tragic. The face regarded him with the tolerance of one accustomed to human folly and all its municipal manifestations. "Sergeant Love will be disappointed," he murmured as the last of the audience searched for umbrellas and suitable explanations. "He likes his arithmetic tidy." Outside, the town clock maintained its reasonable time, and the assembly rooms resumed their dignified composure. Within, the chain lay with the helplessness of things that would have been adequate if only people had behaved properly. Above, in the committee room, a door not quite closed moved slightly in the draught, like a guest with something on his conscience who had decided for now to remain silent. The morning brought that particular variety of Flaxborough drizzle which suggested the weather had been reading municipal reports. Persistent, grey, and calculated to dampen enthusiasm without quite justifying the expense of umbrellas. By 9 o'clock, the news of the previous evening's incident had achieved that remarkable velocity which gossip attains in small towns, bypassing the usual channels of the Flaxborough Gazette and the morning wireless in favour of more intimate pathways. The baker's queue, the butcher's counter, and those whispered exchanges over garden fences that serve as the town's true communication network. At Shire's bakery, the girl who filled Eccles' cakes confided to a customer ordering morning rolls that the police had discovered pools of blood and were saying nothing, which naturally proved that the blood must have been of a quantity unheard of in respectable establishments. The rolls, she added with the authority of one who had nearly witnessed something significant, had improved considerably with the telling. Mrs. Gurnard, whose greengrocery served as a natural clearinghouse for local intelligence, dispensed information with the same practiced ease as she weighed potatoes. "Blood on the stairs," she informed Mrs. Tither, who had arrived ostensibly for a marrow but clearly for something less fibrous. "And that poor orchestra pit fund. Barely a brass farthing in it, they say. Who would stoop so low?" Mrs. Tither, adjusting her floral headscarf with the precision of one preparing for battle, leaned closer. Mr. Delday was seen examining that chain rather closely before the meeting began. Always a shifty sort, if you ask me. Too much interest in other people's business for a stationer. Inspector Purbright arrived at the station to find Sergeant Love arranging papers with the methodical precision of one who believed that proper filing might eventually impose order upon human nature. The morning's reports lay in neat stacks, each representing another citizen's contribution to the growing mythology of the previous evening. "Morning, sir. Mrs. Crampton's been in already. Brought her own tea and a comprehensive account of every suspicious character she's encountered since the coronation." "How thorough of her," said Purbright. settling behind his desk. "And how many suspicious characters would that include?" 17, sir, including the postman, 2 vicars, and someone she describes as that man with the limp who reads parish notices with unseemly attention." The telephone rang with a particular insistence that suggested civic duty rather than emergency. Love answered with the weary courtesy of one who had learned that most municipal crises involved blocked drains or disputed precedents at flower shows. "Inspector Purbright's office." "Yes, Mrs. Tither." "I see. When exactly?" "Very good. We'll be along directly." He replaced the receiver with the expression of someone who had just been invited to a particularly complicated social gathering. "Mrs. Tither, sir. She's discovered something she considers significant about last night. Won't discuss it over the telephone. Apparently it's too delicate for public wires." Mrs. Tither received them in a sitting room where antimacassars fought a losing battle against the advance of modernity. She had arranged chairs with the strategic precision of one who understood that important revelations required proper staging. "Inspector, I've been thinking all night about that dreadful business. One doesn't like to speak ill of neighbors, but there are things that must be said." She gestured toward the tea service with the gravity of one offering evidence. "About Mr. Delday, you understand. His financial circumstances have been challenging." Purbright accepted tea in a cup decorated with roses that appeared to be suffering from some botanical distress. "What sort of challenges, Mrs. Tither?" "His shop hasn't been prospering. People don't buy stationery the way they used to. It's all modern typewriters and fountain pens now. And there was that unfortunate business with the Operatic Society's Scenery Fund 2 years ago." "What business would that be?" Mrs. Tither's voice dropped to the register reserved for discussing particularly virulent strains of social disease. "A discrepancy in the accounts when he was treasurer. £15 unaccounted for. Nothing proven, you understand, but questions were asked. The committee decided discretion was preferable to unpleasantness." Love's pencil moved across his notebook with the steady rhythm of someone recording familiar human disappointments. Purbright reflected that people always described embezzlement as discrepancies, as if money simply wandered off like distracted sheep. After leaving Mrs. Tither to her renewed domestic fortifications, they proceeded to the assembly rooms, where Mrs. Crampton awaited them with the barely contained excitement of one who had discovered something that required official attention. "Inspector, there's more than blood on those stairs. Come and see what I found in the committee room this morning." She led them upstairs with the purposeful stride of someone who had spent the night cataloguing irregularities. The committee room bore the tired dignity of a space that had witnessed countless debates about flower arrangements and drainage improvements. Mrs. Crampton directed their attention to the window overlooking Municipal Lane. "That window was open when I came in this morning. Not wide, mind you, but definitely open. It sticks something dreadful, so it doesn't open by accident. And look here." She indicated the windowsill where the dust had been disturbed in a pattern suggesting someone had leaned heavily against it. "Someone stood here, Inspector. And there's this." Beneath the window, she had discovered an umbrella. Substantial, well-made, with a wooden handle that spoke of either quality or pretension. Near the ribs, a brownish smear caught the morning light with suspicious eloquence. "Whose umbrella, Mrs. Crampton?" "That's just it, Inspector. It wasn't here yesterday when I cleaned. Someone left it during the evening, either at the meeting or after." Purbright examined the umbrella without touching it, noting 3 pale dents in the handle where it might have struck stone. The fabric bore that particular mustiness which suggested storage in damp places. Coal cellars, perhaps, or the sort of cupboard where forgotten municipal property accumulated dignity and cobwebs in equal measure. "The window opens onto the lane?" 10 feet down, sir. Not a difficult drop if you were minded to avoid the front entrance." Love peered over the sill, calculating angles and possibilities. If someone were trying to pass something through the window, say a collection tin, they might cut themselves on the chain if they weren't careful. There was no chain at this window, Mrs. Crampton observed, with the precision of one who knew every fixture in the building. No, said Purbright thoughtfully, but there was one on the tin downstairs. They descended to examine the scene of the previous evening's drama. In daylight, the blood seemed less dramatic but more purposeful, not the result of violence, but of haste combined with insufficient attention to sharp edges. Sergeant, what did the bank tell you about the orchestra pit fund's balance? £3, 14 shillings, sir. Mrs. Mortimer says they've been collecting for months, but committee members keep borrowing for refreshments. More symbolic than profitable, you might say. Someone risked public embarrassment for £3 and 14 shillings. Well, sir, assuming they knew what was in it. From outside, it looked substantial enough. Good tin, proper lock, chain thick enough to suggest valuables. The telephone in the caretaker's office rang, and Mrs. Crampton answered with the brisk efficiency of one accustomed to managing municipal communications. After a brief conversation conducted in the coded language of civic emergency, she returned with news. That was Mr. Hopgood from the council offices. Someone's reported seeing a man in working clothes near the assembly rooms at 10:30 last night, well after the meeting ended, carrying something that might have been a tool bag. Working clothes? Dark jacket, cap, boots that needed attention, the sort of person who might know about locks and chains. Purbright considered this addition to their growing collection of possibilities. The umbrella suggested respectability, attempting concealment. The working clothes implied someone comfortable with practical solutions to mechanical problems. The blood indicated that neither approach had proceeded entirely according to plan. Mrs. Crampton, did anyone from the Operatic Society remain after the meeting? Miss Pollard left her scarf. Purple thing, smells of cheap scent, and there was some discussion about the poster arrangements. Mr. Heatherstone wasn't pleased about the orange arrows Mr. Delday had used to direct people to the cloakrooms. Said they made the place look like a railway station. Mr. Heatherstone runs the lighting for the Operatic Society. Owns half the ladders in Flaxborough and thinks it makes him indispensable. Practical sort. The type who'd know about windows and locks. As they prepared to leave, Purbright paused beside the chain that had caused such modest but significant bloodshed. In daylight, it seemed almost apologetic, a simple security measure that had somehow become the focus of human ambition and miscalculation. Sergeant, let us pay a call on Mr. Delday. A man who sells stationery and keeps spare keys deserves the courtesy of our attention. And Mr. Heatherstone, sir. In due course. Men who own ladders often understand heights and therefore windows. But first, let us see how Mr. Delday's morning has been proceeding. Outside, the drizzle had developed into proper rain, and Flaxborough's citizens hurried about their business with that particular determination which suggested they were all late for appointments of unusual importance. The town maintained its composed exterior, but Purbright sensed the undercurrent of excitement that ran through communities when ordinary routine had been disturbed by the promise of scandal. As they walked toward the high street, Love glanced back at the assembly rooms with the expression of someone who suspected that buildings, like people, might harbor secrets in their upper stories. The umbrella, sir. It suggests someone who planned to leave by the window but wanted to appear respectable if seen. Indeed, Sergeant. Or someone who borrowed respectability for the evening and found it less comfortable than expected. The rain drummed against shop windows with the persistence of someone demanding answers, and Purbright reflected that weather, like crime, often revealed more about human nature than people intended to disclose. Delday's establishment occupied a narrow frontage between Mortimer's haberdashery and a premises that had changed hands so frequently its current purpose remained diplomatically obscure. The window display suggested someone who understood that presentation mattered but lacked the resources to make it entirely convincing. Fountain pens arranged with desperate optimism beside exercise books that had acquired the patient resignation of goods aware their time had passed. Inside, the air carried that particular mixture of India rubber, paste, and the small anxieties of unpaid invoices that marked establishments where hope battled daily with arithmetic. The bell announced their entrance with modest ambition, and Mr. Delday emerged from behind a counter, bearing the honest scars of decades spent supporting the elbows of customers who had discovered that conversation cost less than commerce. He was a man of middle years who had learned to dress respectably on limited means. His collar showed the telltale signs of having been turned, and his cuffs displayed that careful attention to detail which marked the difference between poverty and mere economy. "Inspector Purbright," he said with the careful courtesy of someone who had been expecting this visit. "Sergeant Love, terrible business last night. One doesn't expect such goings-on at improvement meetings." "Indeed not, Mr. Delday." Purbright examined a display of blotting paper with the attention of someone considering a significant purchase. "We're hoping you might help us understand what happened." "You were present throughout the evening?" "Oh yes, certainly. Very interested in Councillor Harpole's observations about continental traffic management." Delday's hands moved to straighten already straight pens, a gesture that spoke of nervous precision. Though there was that unfortunate interruption about the blood. Quite shocking, really. Love positioned himself near a rack of greeting cards, his notebook ready to record the sort of small contradictions that revealed more than grand confessions. The shop possessed that particular silence which suggested business had been modest for some time. "You remained until the end of the meeting?" "Well, naturally, though I did leave shortly after the discovery." Seemed prudent to avoid the confusion. Delday's gaze settled on a display of letter openers with the concentration of someone seeking refuge in familiar objects. "I had urgent accounts to attend to here at the shop. The stationery business, Inspector, is not what it once was." Purbright noted that Delday's right hand bore a small plaster near the knuckle, the sort of minor injury that might result from contact with sharp metal. More tellingly, his left shoe showed a faint smear of dark, waxy polish near the heel, the same shade as the marks they had observed on the assembly room's banister. "You've injured your hand, I see." "This? Oh, that's nothing. Caught it on a filing cabinet yesterday afternoon. These old fixtures can be quite vicious." He flexed his fingers with the careful movement of someone testing for pain. One really should be more careful around metal edges. "Mrs. Tether mentioned that you'd had some familiarity with the orchestra. Pit Fund collection tin. You were seen examining the chain before the meeting began." Delday's face, already pale, seemed to lose a further shade of color. "Examining it?" "Oh, merely a casual glance, Inspector. I'm interested in such things, you know. Security arrangements, and a very poor lock it was, if you ask me. Any amateur could have managed it with the right approach." "So you were aware of its condition?" "Well, I noticed it, yes. Just in passing. One sees these things." He straightened a stack of envelopes, his movements increasingly jerky. "Purely professional interest, you understand." The door chimed again, admitting Dr. Mortlake, who approached with the purposeful stride of someone bearing professional intelligence. "Inspector, I've completed additional analysis of those blood samples." Rather interesting findings. They moved to a quieter corner of the shop where Dr. Mortlake produced a small envelope with evident satisfaction. "The blood shows definite traces of boot polish. Cheap variety, the sort that transfers readily. There are also dark wool fibers caught in the dried blood on the banister, suggesting working clothes. The pattern indicates someone moving quickly up the stairs, though not running." Delday had grown increasingly pale during this recitation, his hands now gripping the counter's edge with visible tension. Dr. Mortlake, Purbright continued conversationally, could such an injury have been treated at home? Easily. A small cut, properly cleaned and bandaged. Nothing requiring professional attention. After the doctor departed, Purbright returned his attention to Delday with renewed interest. There was also mention of previous difficulties with the Operatic Society's scenery fund when you were treasurer. A small discrepancy, I understand. Delday's reaction was immediate and explosive. That is malicious slander, Inspector. A complete fabrication. There was a simple accounting error, swiftly rectified. Mrs. Tither has always harbored resentment since I suggested her prize-winning Victoria sponge was over-decorated. Of course. And what do you make of the fact that the orchestra pit fund tin contained only £3 and 14 shillings? Delday's indignation deflated, replaced by something approaching incredulous pity. £3? Is that all? Good heavens. Someone went to all that trouble for £3. What an utterly pointless exercise. Purbright noted the shift with interest. Delday's outrage at accusations of theft was immediate and strong, but his reaction to the paltry sum suggested genuine bewilderment at such modest criminal ambition. As they prepared to leave, the door admitted Mr. Haggerstone, who entered with the confident stride of someone accustomed to solving practical problems. He carried a toolbox that announced his profession as clearly as a uniform, and his clothes bore the honest stains of someone who worked with his hands. "Inspector, Purbright," he called cheerfully. "Heard about last night's excitement. Terrible when people can't respect civic property. Mr. Haggerstone, you work with the Operatic Society, I understand. Lighting and general maintenance. Keep the old place running properly." He set down his toolbox with the care of someone who understood the value of good tools. These municipal buildings need constant attention if they're not to fall apart entirely. "You were at the meeting last night?" "For a while. Left early to check the stage lighting. We're doing the Yeoman of the Guard, and the electrical arrangements are quite complex." His hands bore the calluses and small scars of someone who worked with machinery, and his fingernails showed traces of oil and paint. "What time would that have been?" "About 8 o'clock, I'd say. Just after that, business with the blood was discovered. Seemed like a good time to make oneself scarce." As Haggerstone continued toward the assembly rooms, Love consulted his notebook with methodical precision. "2 men with opportunity, sir. Both with explanations for recent injuries." "Yes, Sergeant, and both familiar with the collection tin's vulnerabilities." Purbright paused outside Delday's shop, watching the stationer through the window as he rearranged his modest inventory with nervous energy. Mr. Delday's reaction to the modest sum was particularly instructive. A man who considers £3 beneath his criminal attention might also consider himself above suspicion. The rain continued its steady commentary on human folly, and Purbright reflected that small towns, like weather systems, often revealed their true nature only when subjected to unexpected pressure. As they walked toward their next appointment, he considered the growing collection of evidence, boot polish, working clothes, and the curious case of men who knew too much about locks and too little about the contents they protected. "Come, Sergeant. Let us discover what Mrs. Mortimer makes of her orchestra pit fund's modest martyrdom. People often reveal more about crimes against their cherished projects than they intend." Mrs. Mortimer resided in one of those substantial Victorian houses on Willow Drive that suggested prosperity achieved through decades of careful attention to civic duty rather than commercial adventure. The front garden displayed roses arranged with military precision, and the brass nameplate bore the sort of polish that indicated someone who believed appearances reflected moral character. She received them in a drawing room where antimacassars had achieved the dignity of minor monuments, and every surface bore witness to a lifetime devoted to committee work and cultural improvement. "Inspector Purbright, how dreadful about our poor collection tin." She gestured toward a tea service that had clearly been prepared in anticipation of their visit. 3 years we've been gathering funds for proper orchestra pit, lighting, and now this sordid business. Though I must say, whoever took it will be sadly disappointed. Purbright accepted tea in china that bore the confident floral patterns of an era when decoration indicated moral substance. Mrs. Mortimer possessed the sort of face that suggested a resolute teapot, practical, dignified, and capable of maintaining proper temperature under pressure. You managed the fund personally, Mrs. Mortimer. As Secretary-Treasurer of the Orchestra Pit Appeal, yes. A thankless task, I can assure you. One would think supporting the arts would be a universal endeavor, but people are remarkably tight-fisted when it comes to cultural improvement. She poured milk with ceremonial precision. The tin contained exactly 3 pounds, 14 shillings. We banked the larger collections immediately. One can't be too careful with public funds. Who else had access to the collection arrangements? The committee, naturally. Mr. Delday handled our printing when he was treasurer of the Operatic Society, before that unfortunate business with their scenery fund. Her voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who had learned to navigate small-town politics without creating unnecessary enemies. And Mr. Haggerstone, who installed our security arrangements. He's very particular about proper craftsmanship. Love's pencil moved steadily across his notebook. Mr. Haggerstone installed the chain. Oh yes, donated it from his own supplies. Said the original was like a necklace for kittens, his exact words. He attached it himself very thoroughly. Rather ironic, considering. She paused, her composure wavering slightly. He's always testing locks and fixtures, making sure everything works properly. Takes considerable pride in his mechanical knowledge. Through the lace curtains, Purbright observed a man in working clothes examining Mrs. Mortimer's garden gate with professional interest. The figure moved with the confident efficiency of someone accustomed to diagnosing and solving practical problems. That would be Mr. Haggerstone now, Mrs. Mortimer observed, following his gaze. He maintains half the mechanical fixtures in Flaxborough. Reliable. Though he does harbor strong opinions about inferior workmanship. Strong opinions? He becomes quite exercised about shoddy repairs, says they reflect poorly on the entire community. She lowered her voice to the register reserved for discussing character flaws. There was an incident last month about someone attempting electrical work without proper knowledge. He was vocal about it. The front door chimed, and Mrs. Mortimer excused herself with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to managing multiple social obligations simultaneously. Through the thin walls, they could hear a conversation conducted in the careful tones people used when discussing matters requiring diplomatic handling. Mrs. Mortimer, about last night's business, thought you should. No people are asking questions about the fund's actual balance. Delday, particularly, seemed very interested in our record-keeping. What sort of questions? Whether we'd been keeping accurate accounts. Almost as if he suspected we might have been economical with the truth about our collections. Mrs. Mortimer returned with the expression of someone who had received information requiring careful consideration. Mr. Haggerstone wanted to ensure I was aware that speculation is beginning about the fund's contents. He's concerned about damage to the Society's reputation. What sort of speculation? That we've been understating our collections to avoid contributing to other civic projects, or that committee members have been borrowing for personal expenses. Her voice carried the particular distress of someone who had devoted considerable energy to maintaining organizational respectability. Purbright reflected that small-town finances often generated more suspicion than international banking, largely because everyone felt qualified to have opinions about modest sums. Was Mr. Delday's interest in your accounts unusual? Rather, yes. Just yesterday he suggested we should consider more secure storage arrangements. Said it wasn't safe leaving money in collection tins, even with proper locks. She paused, considering. Almost as if he anticipated trouble. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Mortimer accompanied them to the door with the careful courtesy of someone who understood that proper farewells mattered as much as proper introductions. "There was one other thing, Inspector. Yesterday afternoon I saw Mr. Delday outside the assembly rooms looking quite agitated. He was carrying a large umbrella, substantial thing with a thick wooden handle. Rather odd, considering it wasn't raining." Purbright exchanged a glance with Love. The umbrella they had discovered in the committee room bearing its telltale smears and dents. "Did you notice anything else about his behavior?" "Only that he seemed to be waiting for someone, or perhaps watching for something. Kept checking his pocket watch and glancing about rather nervously." Walking back toward the town center, Love consulted his notes with growing interest. "Two men with detailed knowledge of the security arrangements, sir. Both with explanations for recent injuries and both connected to the umbrella evidence. Yes, Sergeant, and both familiar with the fund's modest contents, yet apparently surprised by the actual amount." Purbright paused to observe a group of children playing elaborate games in municipal gardens, their rules seeming to change according to immediate convenience. "The question remains whether our thief was motivated by financial necessity, personal grievance, or simple miscalculation." They encountered Miss Pollard near the post office, where she was examining a display of commemorative stamps with the intensity of someone who believed postal services revealed important truths about national character. She approached them with evident relief. "Inspector Purbright, I've been hoping to speak with you. There's something about last night that's been troubling me." "What sort of something, Miss Pollard?" "Well, after that dreadful announcement about the blood, I went to the ladies' cloakroom to compose myself. On my way back, I saw a man on the back stairs, working clothes, cloth cap, the sort who calls ladies ducks. He was holding his hand as though it pained him considerably." "What time would this have been?" "Just after 9, I'd say." The lecture had resumed, though with considerably less enthusiasm. She adjusted her violet scarf with the precision of someone who understood that accessories required constant attention. I asked if he was unwell, and he told me quite rudely to mind my own business. Not the sort of response one expects from municipal employees. As Miss Pollard continued toward her afternoon obligations, Purbright reflected that criminal investigations, like amateur theatricals, often featured more characters than the plot could reasonably accommodate. The challenge lay not in finding people with opportunity and motive, but in determining which combination of human weaknesses had actually resulted in modest bloodshed on respectable stairs. "Come, Sergeant, let us return to the assembly rooms. Mrs. Crampton may have additional observations about last night's performance that escaped our earlier attention." The afternoon light cast long shadows across Flaxborough's streets, and Purbright noted that the town seemed to be conducting its business with slightly more animation than usual. Crime, even of the most modest variety, had a way of energizing communities that had grown comfortable with predictable routines. At the station, Love arranged their growing collection of evidence with methodical precision. "So we have Delday with financial difficulties and suspicious behavior, Haggerstone with mechanical knowledge and direct connection to the security arrangements, and an unknown man in working clothes who was definitely injured. And an umbrella that suggests someone wished to appear respectable while conducting disreputable business," Purbright added, studying the town map without really needing it. "Men who work with their hands seldom carry umbrellas, Sergeant. They carry weather. If someone in working clothes brought one, he either borrowed it or wished to be thought the sort of person who knew which end to hold." "Borrowed from where, sir?" "From someone who keeps umbrellas for others and uses them rarely himself." Purbright glanced toward the assembly rooms, where the afternoon sun was beginning to reveal details that morning shadows had concealed. "Perhaps it's time we had a more thorough conversation with Mr. Pegg about his custodial responsibilities. Caretakers, like confessors, often know more about human nature than they're invited to discuss." The rain had stopped, leaving the streets gleaming with that particular cleanliness that made Flaxborough appear more virtuous than its citizens probably deserved. In the distance, the town clock chimed the half-hour with mechanical reliability, a sound that suggested order and predictability in a world where people insisted on complicating simple arrangements with entirely human motivations. Mr. Pegg inhabited a small kingdom behind the assembly room stage, whose frontiers were marked by a pegboard of keys, a row of brooms that appeared capable of defending the place against foreign invasion, and a cracked mug bearing the legend, "Borough of Flaxborough, Silver Jubilee," now silver chiefly in sentiment. He had the look of a man who had spent so long listening to public events through walls that he had developed a preference for the muffled version. His mustache was of the sort that healthily distrusted novelty. His tweed jacket could have been woven from the floor sweepings of a respectable tailor. When Purbright and Love appeared in his doorway, he set down a length of sash cord with reluctance, as if it were a pet that had chosen an inopportune moment to curl up for attention. "Morning, mister." "Pegg," said Purbright, "we've come to ask you about last night's disturbance." "Ah." Pegg endowed the syllable with the weariness of one who has known many disturbances, most of them involving committees rearranging chairs. "There's always a disturbance when people get together to improve things, Inspector." This one had blood, granted. "But I've seen worse when the Floral Society," argued Begonias. "Your stairs have received more attention than they bargained for," Purbright said mildly. "We wonder who might have been using the back way during the meeting." "Anyone who wishes to avoid being asked to join a subcommittee," Pegg replied. "I lock the door at 6:30 and again after the interval if there is one. Last night there wasn't. I kept an ear open in case someone thought the back stairs were a shortcut to virtue." "Anyone try them?" Pegg looked annoyed at having to concede that human nature did not always respect facilities timetabled for it. "Someone did." Could hear the latch. Opened the door and found nobody there. Heard scuffling overhead a minute later. That'd be the landing by the committee room. Sound comes down the stairwell like a bad conscience. Purbright glanced at the keys arranged with ecclesiastical order. The committee room window. Mrs. Crampton found it part open this morning. Did she now? Pegg's mustache signed agreement that windows had their ways. That window sticks like honesty at a rates meeting. You don't open it by accident. Last summer, mister, Haggerstone planned the frame, but you know Haggerstone. If something isn't resisting, he isn't happy. He also said a dab of soap on the runners helps. I dare say he dabbed some last night. There's marks. You'd noticed? I noticed the soap this morning. Pegg's tones suggested he noticed more in the morning than the council managed in a month. And I noticed someone had used a wedge. Not one of mine. A wedge. Pegg walked them upstairs. On the landing, shadowed by the formidable Victorian benefactor who had given his likeness to the banister stains, he pushed the committee room door and then stooped to retrieve, from the angle where skirting met floor, a small flattened triangle. There. Purbright accepted it between finger and thumb. It was a piece of stiff, glossy card folded once to make a crude chalk. Its color was vivid and unforgiving, a bright, almost impudent orange. Not your usual wedge, Purbright observed. My wedges are oak offcuts and cents, Pegg said, not paper shouting at people. Love took the bit of card and turned it over. On the unexposed face was a set of truncated letters. -OOMS arrow. The arrow itself had been trimmed, leaving only a suggestion of direction. Looks like one of those arrows Mr. Delday fixed up, Love said, pointing to the cloakrooms. Pegg sniffed. They had the place looking like a charabanc route. Haggerstone had words with him about it. Said you don't put industrial orange in a building full of brown paint and respectability. Delday said the color was attention-getting. The only thing it got was Haggerstone's temper, far as I could see. Purbright slid the bright fragment into an envelope he conjured from a pocket, with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to keeping small promises to himself. You mentioned soap on the runners, Mr. Peg. Peg opened the window with the resigned intimacy of a man handling an old pet that bites. The sash did move, though with the reluctant sigh of aged wood being urged to modern standards. Along the inner edge of the frame, pale smears gave off the faint, sweet odor of household soap. There you are. Not my doing. And not Mrs. Crampton's either. She won't touch windows that bite back. Love leaned out to gauge height. 10 feet down, a man could pass a tin to someone below. Or drop it to himself, Peg suggested. So there's an ash bin under there that's been dented by less worthy causes. Purbright looked out. The bin in question bore a fresh bruise near its rim, paint scraped, metal puckered with a recent indignity. On the lid lay 3 particles of something glossy and colored, flecks of the same orange card. Mr. Peg, the umbrella we found. Would that be from your collection? Peg's mustache arranged itself into a frown. We keep 2 in the stand for wet councillors. 1 respectable black with a decent handle. Town hall issue, I suppose. The other a formidable affair with a spike you could plant potatoes with. Both marked with our stamp on a brass collar. FAR. If you saw such a collar on your umbrella last night, it wasn't visiting. Before you ask, yes, 1 is missing. Which? The respectable black. The potato planter's still there, though. Someone's been at the ferrule. I polished them both yesterday afternoon out of boredom and noticed the mark missing this morning. Dr. Mortlake arrived as they descended, carrying his leather case with the purposeful stride of someone bearing additional professional intelligence. Inspector, I've completed further analysis of those blood samples. The boot-polished traces are quite distinctive. Cheap variety sold primarily at Gurnard's hardware shop. Rather limited distribution in a town this size. And the pattern suggests someone moving upstairs while bleeding, but there are also traces on the window frame. Who had the run of things last night? Purbright asked Peg after the doctor departed. Mrs. Crampton, though she doesn't run so much as regulate. Mr. Harpole, prancing in and out to fetch his slides. Mr. Haggerstone, naturally on some business of his own. I told him we weren't staging yeomen in the committee room, and he said he wasn't rehearsing. He was verifying access. And Mr. Delde, who stuck his arrows up where they'd annoy the dead. He was here early, before 6, with a paste pot. Did anyone borrow an umbrella? Peg thought. Not from me, not by asking. People help themselves when it's only rain. I do recall a little to-do at the door, Mrs. Mortimer fussing at those who came late. A chap in a cap slipped past her, staring at the floor like he thought the liner was going to tell him where to go. Might have taken the umbrella. It was there before that, and not after. Chap in a cap. Working clothes, boots that had met weather, smelled of oil. Not one of ours that I know of. He didn't look at me, and I didn't look at him. Bargain. In the little cupboard under the stairs, Peg produced a small brass collar with worn letters. Found this loose against the skirting by the front doors just now. It's off the umbrella, I'd say. The little screw's gone. Purbright took the collar, FAR. Indeed, faint but resolute. If a man thought to remove this, he was careful about appearances. Careful, Peg agreed, or vain. There's a difference, but it amounts to the same thing until it matters. As they prepared to leave, Mr. Hopgood from the council offices appeared with a file and the flourish of one accustomed to applause for paperwork. Inspector, I've made inquiries regarding keys. Committee room keys held by myself, Mrs. Mortimer, Mr. Peg, and Mr. Haggerstone, who requested a copy when he planed the window last summer. At the bottom of his typed list, an addition in discreet handwriting, temporary issue, Borough Works, access to attic water tank. Returned, 14th inst. Bragg, Mr. Suberta, Bragg. Purbright looked up. Edward Bragg, foreman with Borough Works. He was here yesterday afternoon to examine a leak above the committee room. Mr. Haggerstone complained of damp on the stage curtains. Outside in Municipal Lane, they found the ash bin bearing its fresh dent. Inside, among grey ash and paper ghosts, lay a small screw, blackened at the tip, with a thread that had lost a fight with haste. From the umbrella collar, Love observed. From something that did not wish to be identified, Purbright amended. The orange wedge suggests Mr. Delday's handiwork, yet someone went to considerable trouble to remove identifying marks from borrowed property. As they walked toward the station, Love consulted his notebook with growing interest. 2 men with detailed knowledge of the security arrangements, sir. And now we have Bragg with legitimate access, plus this unknown man in working clothes. Yes, Sergeant. And an umbrella that suggests someone wished to appear respectable while conducting disreputable business. Purbright paused to observe a group of children playing in municipal gardens, their rules seeming to change according to immediate convenience. Men who work with their hands seldom carry umbrellas, Sergeant. They carry weather. If someone in working clothes brought one, he either borrowed it or wished to be thought the sort of person who knew which end to hold. The afternoon light cast long shadows across Flaxborough's streets, and Purbright reflected that small towns, like weather systems, often revealed their true nature only when subjected to unexpected pressure. The orange card wedge connected directly to Delday's controversial arrows, yet the working clothes and missing umbrella collar suggested someone else entirely, or someone who wished to appear to be someone else. Come, Sergeant. I believe it's time we had a conversation with Mr. Bragg about his recent roofing activities. Men who work at heights often understand windows, and Borough Works employees are notably familiar with municipal property. The town clock chimed the half-hour with mechanical reliability, a sound that suggested order and predictability in a world where people insisted on complicating simple arrangements with entirely human motivations. The Borough Works yard occupied that particular variety of municipal real estate where practical necessity had triumphed over aesthetic consideration, leaving behind a collection of sheds, vehicles, and equipment that suggested civic duty conducted without pretense. Mr. Edward Bragg emerged from a corrugated iron office bearing the weathered competence of someone who had spent decades explaining to councillors why their optimistic estimates bore little resemblance to hydraulic reality. Bragg possessed the compact build and permanently stained hands of a man who understood that municipal infrastructure required constant negotiation between ambition and arithmetic. His office smelled of pipe compound and the sort of tea that had been brewed to industrial strength, while blueprints curled like ancient scrolls across a drawing board that had witnessed more practical wisdom than most committee rooms. "Inspector Purbright," he said with the careful courtesy of someone who had learned that politeness prevented more complications than it caused. "Sergeant Love, I suppose this concerns yesterday's work at the assembly rooms." Among other things, Mr. Bragg. "We understand you were attending to a leak in the committee room area. Water damage above the committee room, yes. Been seeping through for weeks, staining the ceiling. Mr. Haggerstone complained it was affecting the stage curtains. Said the place was beginning to smell like a cellar." Bragg gestured toward a clipboard where work orders competed for space with pencil calculations and tea stains. "Simple enough repair once you found the source. Loose slate, bit of pointing needed." "Your hours yesterday?" "Arrived about 2 o'clock, finished around 5, had to access the attic space to reach the tank properly." He indicated a key log mounted beside his desk with bureaucratic precision. "Temporary keys from Mr. Hopgood, signed them out in the morning, returned them at 5:15. All proper and recorded." Love made methodical notes. "You encountered anyone else during your work?" "Mr. Haggerstone, naturally. In and out like a man with shares in the door hinges. Very concerned about proper workmanship, asking about materials, testing my repairs. Even examined the committee room window to ensure I hadn't disturbed the frame." Bragg's tone carried the patient resignation of someone accustomed to supervision by enthusiastic amateurs. He knows his way around tools and fixtures, I'll grant him that. Did he mention the orchestra pit fund arrangements? Funny you should ask. He did comment on the security being inadequate. Cheap lock, chain that wouldn't deter a determined child. Said it was asking for trouble, leaving money in such arrangements. Bragg shifted slightly, his expression suggesting he had formed his own opinions about Mr. Haggerstone's interests, though I got the impression he was more concerned about the building's reputation than the actual contents. Purbright noted this with interest. Anyone else about the building? Mr. Delday was there when I left, fussing with those orange arrows he'd posted everywhere, bright as traffic cones and twice as irritating. Looked like a man trying to convince himself he was doing something important. Bragg's professional pride clearly extended to matters of municipal aesthetics. And Mrs. Crampton, of course, polishing the banisters like they were expecting royal inspection. Through the office window, they could observe a young man examining the contents of a borough works van with professional interest. His working clothes bore the honest stains of recent labor, and his movements suggested the careful efficiency of someone who understood the value of proper tools. That would be Collins, Bragg explained. Good worker, though he's particular about equipment quality. Finished his shift at 2 yesterday and went straight to his lodgings on Sebastopol Street. Mrs. Grope keeps a close eye on her tenants. If Collins had been anywhere questionable after hours, she'd have chapter and verse. As they prepared to leave, Bragg accompanied them to the yard entrance with measured steps. There was one thing, Inspector. When I was leaving yesterday, I noticed someone had been at the umbrella stand in the assembly rooms. Both umbrellas were there when I arrived for work, but the better one, black with a brass collar, was missing when I finished. Seemed odd, considering it wasn't raining. You're certain about the timing? Positive. I'd considered borrowing it myself, but it seemed presumptuous. Mrs. Crampton has strong views about people helping themselves to municipal property. Walking back toward the town center, they encountered Mrs. Crampton near the post office, where she was examining a display of postal orders with the intensity of someone who believed government services revealed important truths about national character. Inspector Purbright, she approached with evident purpose, I've remembered something else about last night. When I was cleaning the committee room this morning, I found this caught in the carpet near the window. She produced a small dark button from her handbag. Cheap horn, the kind found on working jackets purchased from establishments that catered to men who needed clothes capable of surviving honest labor. The thread shows traces of dark wool, and it wasn't there during my afternoon cleaning yesterday. Someone lost it during the evening, I'd say. Anything else, Mrs. Crampton? Marks on the windowsill that looked like someone had rested something heavy there. Cleaned them off before I realized they might be significant. She paused, considering. And I recall now, Mr. Haggerstone signed out the committee room key again yesterday evening. Said he needed to check the lighting arrangements for Saturday's rehearsal. Love consulted his notebook. What time would that have been? About 5:30. He returned it this morning when I arrived for work. Said he'd finished around 10 last night. As Mrs. Crampton continued toward her afternoon obligations, Purbright reflected on this additional intelligence. The key timing placed Haggerstone with legitimate access during the crucial period, yet also provided him with opportunity that extended well beyond innocent maintenance. The button confirms someone in working clothes was indeed in the committee room, Sergeant. Combined with the umbrella evidence and the timing of key access, we're developing a clearer picture of the evening's events. But which of our suspects actually fits the evidence, sir? That, Sergeant, remains the question requiring more delicate investigation. Purbright glanced toward the assembly rooms, where afternoon shadows were beginning to reveal architectural details that morning light had obscured. Men often reveal more about themselves when they believe they're being clever than when they're attempting honesty. They paused, outside Gurnard's hardware, where Mrs. Gurnard was arranging a window display with the precision of someone who understood that presentation mattered as much as inventory. "About that grey gull polish," Love began conversationally. "Flies off the shelf when there's a funeral," Mrs. Gurnard replied with immediate understanding. "People will have a shine for grief if not for Sundays. Yesterday I sold 2 tins, one to young Collins from the works, who's regular as clockwork, and another to a man who kept his cap pulled low. Can you describe the second customer?" "Middle height, quick about his business like he was late for something important. Hands showed honest work, black under the nails, and paint on his thumb. Good quality paint, mind you, the sort they use for stage work. My brother did scenery for amateur theatricals, so I recognize the consistency." "What time?" "After 6, before 7. I had the vegetables arranged for evening trade, as young Collins mentioned when he came by earlier." As they continued their circuit, Purbright considered the accumulating evidence with growing satisfaction. The case was acquiring the logical structure that suggested human nature. However complicated its motivations, eventually revealed itself through entirely predictable patterns of behavior. "An interesting collection of clues, Sergeant. Button evidence pointing to working clothes, umbrella borrowed and deliberately made untraceable, stage paint on mysterious fingers, and key access that encompasses our crucial time frame. All pointing toward Mr. Haggerstone, sir. Or toward someone who wished us to think of Mr. Haggerstone, Sergeant. The art of investigation often lies in distinguishing between evidence that reveals truth and evidence that conceals it." Purbright paused to observe a municipal vehicle whose driver was conducting an animated discussion with a lamppost about right-of-way. "Tomorrow, I believe, we shall arrange a small experiment. If our thief went to such trouble to manage appearances, perhaps we can discover what happens when those appearances are subjected to gentle pressure." The town clock chimed the hour with mechanical reliability, and Purbright reflected that Flaxborough was conducting its daily business with a slightly heightened animation that suggested everyone was aware of being observed. Crime, even of the most modest variety, had a way of making communities conscious of their own respectability and of the small compromises that respectability sometimes required. "Come, Sergeant, time to arrange our pieces for the next movement. Chess players and criminals both reveal their true intentions when they believe victory is within reach." The morning brought that particular variety of administrative satisfaction which suggested paperwork might eventually triumph over human complexity, though Inspector Purbright had learned not to trust bureaucratic optimism until the filing was complete. He arrived at the station to find Sergeant Love arranging evidence with the methodical precision of someone who believed that proper organization might eventually impose order upon criminal enterprise. On the desk, their modest collection had acquired the dignity of a small museum exhibition. The umbrella collar with its telltale screw marks, the orange card wedge bearing traces of paste, and the button from working clothes that had clearly seen honest labor. To these, Love had added Dr. Mortlake's preliminary reports, typed with the clinical precision that made even modest bloodshed sound like a scientific achievement. "Morning, sir," Dr. Mortlake called with additional findings about the blood samples. "The boot-polished traces are definitely grey gull variety, and he's identified fabric impressions in the dried blood. Coarse wool, dark-colored, consistent with working clothes of the sort worn by Borough Works employees." Purbright settled behind his desk with the measured satisfaction of someone whose theories were acquiring the dignity of evidence. "And Mrs. Gurnard's mysterious evening customer? She's provided additional details, sir." Remembered he carried a canvas tool bag and seemed particularly concerned about the polish drying quickly. Said he had boots that needed immediate attention for evening work. Love consulted his notebook with growing interest. Also mentioned he had paint under his fingernails. Good quality paint, the theatrical sort. The telephone rang with that particular insistence which suggested civic duty rather than emergency. Love answered with practiced courtesy, his expression shifting from professional attention to barely concealed satisfaction. "Inspector Purbright's office." "Yes, Mrs. Crampton." "What sort of something? We'll be along directly." He replaced the receiver with the careful precision of someone who had received information requiring delicate handling. "Mrs. Crampton, sir. She's found something during her morning cleaning that she considers significant. Says it changes everything about Tuesday evening." They found Mrs. Crampton waiting in the assembly room's foyer with the barely contained excitement of someone who had discovered treasure in familiar territory. She led them to the spot where the orchestra pit fun tin had been chained, gesturing toward the wooden skirting with the pride of someone who had achieved professional vindication. "Inspector, I've been thinking about that blood in the chain all night. This morning I gave the area a proper going over, the sort of cleaning that reveals what casual attention misses." She produced a small envelope from her apron pocket. Found this wedged tight behind the skirting, just below where the chain was attached. The envelope contained a piece of thin metal wire, no longer than a man's thumb, twisted at one end with the peculiar precision that suggested both purpose and failure. It was not the crude remnant of broken chain they might have expected, but something far more delicate, the sort of tool that required skill rather than strength. Purbright examined it with growing interest. The wire was dark, almost black, with a patina that spoke of careful handling rather than casual use. More significantly, one end had been twisted into a precise hook, while the other showed the telltale marks of having been gripped by pliers or similar tools. "This is most illuminating, Mrs. Crampton. You found it wedged behind the skirting?" "Tight as a secret, Inspector. Had to use my cleaning knife to work it free. Been there since Tuesday night, I'd say. Dropped when someone was working on that lock." Love peered over Purbright's shoulder with professional curiosity. "Looks like a lockpick, sir, the sort burglars use in novels. Or the sort someone with mechanical knowledge might fashion for a specific purpose," Purbright observed mildly. He turned the wire in the light, noting the careful attention to its construction. "This wasn't made hastily, Sergeant. Someone took considerable care with its preparation. The discovery cast their previous assumptions in an entirely different light. The blood on the stairs, the modest amount suggesting surprise rather than violence, the quiet departure, all became more coherent if viewed through the lens of delicate work gone wrong rather than crude force applied unsuccessfully. If someone was attempting to pick the lock rather than break the chain, Love reasoned, they wouldn't need working clothes or heavy tools. Just skill and the right equipment. "Precisely, Sergeant. And if the lock proved more stubborn than anticipated, or if they were interrupted, a hasty departure might indeed result in a cut hand and dropped evidence." Purbright considered the implications with growing satisfaction. This suggests someone with both mechanical knowledge and access to the building. Someone who could prepare properly and work without attracting attention. As they prepared to examine the lock mechanism more thoroughly, the front door admitted Mr. Delday, who entered with the nervous energy of someone who had spent considerable time that morning rehearsing important conversations. His bandaged hand moved restlessly as he approached, and his collar showed the telltale signs of having been adjusted multiple times. "Inspector Purbright, I must speak with you about Tuesday evening. There's been a terrible misunderstanding about my presence near the assembly rooms." "What sort of misunderstanding, Mr. Delday?" "People are suggesting I had some involvement in this sordid business with the collection tin. Mrs. Tither has been particularly vocal about my supposed financial difficulties." His voice carried the particular distress of someone who had discovered that reputation required constant maintenance. "I must insist on the opportunity to demonstrate my complete innocence." Purbright noted that Delday's gaze kept returning to the wire in his hand, and that the stationer's usual nervous precision had acquired an edge of genuine anxiety. "You mentioned yesterday that the lock was inadequate, that any amateur could have managed it with the right approach." "Well, yes, I noticed it was a simple mechanism. Purely professional observation, you understand. In the stationery business, one develops an eye for security arrangements. Delday's explanation carried the careful precision of someone who had prepared it in advance. But I would never, that is, the very suggestion is preposterous. Of course, though someone clearly did attempt to open it with considerable skill. Purbright held up the wire with casual interest. This suggests someone with both mechanical knowledge and access to proper tools. Someone who might fashion such an implement with considerable care. The color drained from Delday's face as he stared at the twisted wire. Where did you find that? Behind the skirting, where someone dropped it Tuesday evening. Rather cleverly made, wouldn't you say? The sort of tool that requires both skill and patience to construct properly. As Delday struggled to compose a response, the door admitted Mr. Haggerstone, who approached with his usual confident stride but paused when he observed the tableau before him. His professional eye immediately fixed on the wire in Purbright's hand, and his expression shifted from curiosity to something approaching professional appreciation. That's a proper bit of work, Inspector. Whoever made that knew what they were about. The hook's been annealed to prevent breakage, and the grip end's been carefully textured. He paused, his mechanical expertise overcoming discretion. Takes considerable skill to fashion something like that. Not the sort of tool an amateur would attempt. Indeed, Mr. Haggerstone, the sort of precision that suggests someone with considerable mechanical knowledge and access to proper workshop facilities. Well, yes, naturally. Though I can't imagine why anyone would go to such trouble for a simple padlock. Crude force would have been far more efficient. Haggerstone's professional pride was clearly engaged. This suggests someone who preferred elegance to effectiveness, the sort of person who might value the intellectual challenge over practical results. Love consulted his notebook with growing interest. Both of you gentlemen would possess the skills necessary to create such a tool. Certainly, Haggerstone replied with evident satisfaction, though I would have made a more robust version. This one's rather delicate, the sort that might break under pressure or cut the user if handled carelessly. Delday had grown increasingly pale during this technical discussion, his bandaged hand now trembling slightly. The wire, examined in the light of professional expertise, had acquired the character of evidence that pointed in increasingly specific directions. The question, Purbright continued conversationally, is whether our lockpicker succeeded in their attempt or was interrupted in the process. The blood suggests something went wrong. Perhaps the tool slipped, or the lock proved more resistant than expected. A cut from a tool like that would be quite distinctive, Doctor, Mortlake observed, having arrived with his characteristic quiet efficiency. Sharp, clean, consistent with contact with precision metalwork rather than crude force. As the implications settled like dust after an explosion, Delday's carefully maintained composure began its steady dissolution. The man who had spent years selling the tools of organization and precision was discovering that his own arrangements required solutions beyond the scope of traditional stationery. I think, Purbright concluded with characteristic understatement, we should continue this discussion at the station. There are several aspects of Tuesday evening that would benefit from more detailed examination. Outside, Flaxborough continued its daily business with the measured pace of a community that had learned not to expect dramatic revelations before lunch. The morning light revealed architectural details that suggested the town's Victorian builders had possessed more optimism about human nature than subsequent events had entirely justified. "The wire changes everything, sir," Love observed as they walked toward the station. "It suggests premeditation rather than opportunism, skill rather than desperation." "Indeed, Sergeant. And it narrows our field considerably. Men who can fashion precision tools are not as common as men who can apply crude force." Purbright reflected that criminal investigation, like clockwork, often revealed its mechanisms only when examined with proper attention to detail. The question now is whether our craftsman's pride will prove stronger than his discretion. The town clock chimed the half-hour with mechanical reliability, and Purbright noted that Flaxborough's citizens were conducting their morning business with slightly more animation than usual. Small scandals, he had learned, possessed the remarkable ability to energize communities that had grown comfortable with predictable routines. As they approached the station, Purbright considered the growing collection of evidence that suggested human nature, however complicated its motivations, eventually revealed itself through entirely predictable patterns of behavior. The challenge lay not in finding the truth, but in allowing it to emerge with the dignity that befitted both justice and the peculiar sensibilities of a small English market town. Inspector Purbright spent the afternoon in that contemplative quiet which served him better than most people's energy. The twisted wire lay on his desk like a small, dark question mark, its precision craftsmanship more eloquent than any crude instrument of force might have been. He had arranged, through Sergeant Love's carefully, indiscreet conversation with Mr. Hopgood, for word to circulate that the police would attend the Operatic Society's evening rehearsal to observe certain developments. Such announcements, he had learned, possessed the remarkable ability to make guilty parties either very careful or very careless. "Not a trap, sir?" Love inquired, as if traps might scuff the station's dignity. "An opportunity, Sergeant," said Purbright. "Some people will take comfort in police presence. Others will find it less reassuring." At 3:30, Mrs. Mortimer arrived bearing the particular expression of someone who had discovered that civic duty sometimes required uncomfortable decisions. She carried a manila envelope with a reverence appropriate to recovered treasure. "Inspector, this was delivered to my door not 20 minutes ago. No stamp, no signature, but the contents are significant." The envelope held exactly £3, 14 shillings, accompanied by a brief typed message on municipal letterhead for the Orchestra Pit Fund. Better locks recommended. The typing bore those telltale imperfections that marked institutional machinery. A faint E, a crowded R, and a capital K that seemed to have suffered some minor industrial accident. Mr. Hopgood's typewriter, Mrs. Mortimer observed with the certainty of someone who had received countless committee notices. Though who had access to it yesterday evening is another matter entirely. After she departed, Love examined the paper with professional interest. "The watermark reads, 'County Crown, sir. Mr. Delday stocks it exclusively, says the crest suggests quality to customers who appreciate such distinctions.'" "Indeed. And the envelope bears traces of flour along one edge, as if it had been placed temporarily among baked goods." Purbright reflected that people often revealed more about themselves through their attempts at concealment than through their honest admissions. Someone wished to return the money while maintaining anonymity. Conscience, perhaps, or merely tidiness. The evening rehearsal promised to provide illumination of a different sort. By 7 o'clock, the assembly rooms had acquired that particular atmosphere of organized chaos which marked amateur theatrical endeavors. The yeomen of the guard demanded considerable coordination between patriotic sentiment and practical stagecraft, and the society was discovering that Gilbert and Sullivan's cheerful approach to duty required more effort than duty itself. Purbright positioned himself where he could observe without becoming part of the performance, noting how people arranged themselves when they believed they were being watched. Mr. Haggerstone moved among his lighting equipment with proprietary satisfaction, testing connections and making adjustments with the confidence of someone who understood mechanical relationships. His hands bore the honest stains of recent work, paint under the fingernails, oil on the thumb, the sort of evidence that spoke of practical engagement with real problems. Mr. Delday arrived with the nervous energy of someone who had spent considerable time that day rehearsing conversations with authority. He carried program proofs and an expression that suggested civic duty might provide refuge from personal anxiety. His bandaged hand moved restlessly, and he seemed particularly conscious of the committee room door, glancing toward it with the wariness of someone who had developed complicated feelings about familiar places. "Inspector," approached Miss Pollard, adjusting her violet scarf with ceremonial precision. "Such a comfort to see the law taking an interest in cultural improvement. Do you suppose criminals appreciate irony?" "Only when it serves their purposes," Purbright replied, which Miss Pollard accepted as philosophical wisdom. Dr. Mortlake had positioned himself strategically near the front, his medical bag suggesting preparedness for theatrical emergencies of either artistic or physical variety. Mr. Bragg appeared with a step-ladder and the patient courtesy of someone whose professional reputation depended on fixing things that other people had complicated. At 20 minutes past 8, during a passage where 6 yeomen explained their philosophical approach to arrest in harmonies that had survived worse interpretations, the lights failed with theatrical timing. The collective "oh" that rose from the assembled company suggested surprise tempered by familiarity with municipal electrical systems. "Fuse," announced Mr. Pegg, producing a replacement with the satisfaction of someone whose pessimism had been professionally vindicated. He and Haggerstone engaged in the sort of technical duet that marked collaboration between theoretical knowledge and practical experience, restoring illumination within minutes. It was during this brief interval of restored visibility that someone noticed the orchestra pit. The bass drum, positioned with military precision for Saturday's performance, bore a clean, crescent-shaped slit in its skin. Within the hollow interior, like an unwelcome gift, sat the orchestra pit fund collection tin. The discovery produced that particular silence which marked moments when ordinary events revealed themselves to be less ordinary than they had appeared. Love moved with quiet efficiency to examine the evidence, noting that the tin was empty, clean, and bore faint traces of paste around its rim, the cheap, efficient variety that never entirely dried in Flaxborough's climate. "The lock's been opened properly," Haggerstone observed, unable to resist professional commentary. "Not forced. Someone knew what they were about." He paused, examining the mechanism with evident appreciation. Though they used wax in the keyway, amateur technique, better to file the warding slightly, except that leaves evidence. Purbright accepted the tin with ceremonial gravity, noting that someone had taken considerable care to clean it thoroughly. The faint orange specks around the rim suggested contact with colored paste, while the absence of any identifying marks indicated systematic attention to detail. "Who would have had access to place this here?" he inquired mildly. "Anyone with keys to the building," Mrs. Mortimer replied with the precision of someone who understood institutional security. "The committee, naturally. Mr. Pegg, Mr. Haggerstone for his maintenance work, and the borough works has temporary access when required." The slit in the drumhead had been made with surgical precision, a single, confident cut that spoke of sharp tools and steady hands. Bragg examined it with professional interest, noting that the blade had been drawn cleanly without hesitation or correction. "Stage knife," suggested Love. "Too clean," Haggerstone replied. "Stage knives are deliberately blunted. This was done with a proper craft blade, well maintained and recently sharpened." As the society attempted to restore both musical and emotional equilibrium, Purbright withdrew to examine the committee room. The typewriter case sat beneath the table with institutional dignity, its contents bearing the honest scars of municipal service. A brief experiment confirmed what Mrs. Mortimer had observed. The machine's vowels had developed an economical approach to their duties, while certain consonants displayed the sort of individual character that made identification possible. "So our anonymous correspondent used municipal equipment to return municipal funds," Love observed. "Either someone with legitimate access, someone who knew where to find it, or someone who wished us to think they had such access," Purbright replied thoughtfully. "The question is whether this second incident represents conscience, mockery, or misdirection." Returning to the rehearsal, he observed the various reactions to the evening's drama. Day appeared genuinely shocked by the discovery, his nervousness shifting from personal anxiety to something approaching bewilderment. Haggerstone's response was characteristically technical, more interested in the precision of the cut than its implications. Mrs. Mortimer displayed the particular satisfaction of someone whose organizational instincts had been vindicated by the return of missing funds. "The money's been returned," she announced to the assembled company with evident relief. "Someone has seen fit to restore what was taken, though the method leaves something to be desired." As the rehearsal concluded and people gathered their belongings with the careful casualness that marked the end of eventful evenings, Purbright reflected on the curious psychology of their anonymous correspondent. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to return £3, 14 shillings, an amount that hardly seemed worth elaborate criminal enterprise. Yet the precision of both the original theft and its theatrical resolution suggested a mind that valued method over mere results. "Come, Sergeant," he said as the assembly rooms resumed their dignified composure. "Tomorrow we shall ask some very polite questions about typewriters and craft knives. Tonight has provided considerable illumination about the sort of person who considers drama an appropriate substitute for simple honesty." Walking back through Flaxborough's quiet streets, Love consulted his notebook with growing interest. So we have someone with access to municipal equipment, knowledge of the building's security, and sufficient theatrical instinct to stage a dramatic return. "Indeed, Sergeant. And someone whose conscience proved stronger than their original intentions, but whose vanity demanded that the return be conducted with appropriate flourish." Purbright paused beneath a street lamp that cast their shadows with Victorian precision. Men often reveal more about themselves when they attempt to be clever than when they strive for honesty. The town clock chimed the half-hour with mechanical reliability, and Purbright reflected that small communities, like clockwork mechanisms, often revealed their true nature only when subjected to the sort of pressure that made hidden springs visible. Tomorrow would bring the careful questions that transformed suspicion into certainty, allowing truth to emerge with the dignity appropriate to both justice and the peculiar sensibilities of a respectable English market town. The wire suggests premeditation, the returned money indicates conscience, and the theatrical staging reveals vanity, he mused as they approached the station. "An interesting combination of qualities, Sergeant. One that should make our final conversation quite illuminating." Above them, the assembly room's windows reflected the street lamps with the patient dignity of buildings that had witnessed countless human dramas without losing faith in the possibility of eventual resolution. In the distance, a church bell marked the hour with the sort of measured optimism that suggested morning would bring both answers and the opportunity for appropriate civic forgiveness. Inspector Purbright arrived at his office with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose patience with human complexity had been rewarded by evidence that possessed the courtesy to arrange itself logically. The morning light revealed their accumulated collection with fresh clarity. Each piece no longer an isolated curiosity, but part of a pattern that spoke to the peculiar psychology of someone who valued craftsmanship above common sense. Sergeant Love had prepared the new evidence with ceremonial precision, the tool roll lying open like a small shrine to methodical preparation. The lock picks gleamed with the sort of attention that suggested their creator had taken genuine pride in their construction, while the craft knife bore the honest wear of regular use, tempered by careful maintenance. "The tool roll changes everything, sir," Love observed, consulting his notebook with growing satisfaction. "Someone spent considerable time preparing for Tuesday evening's enterprise." This wasn't opportunistic mischief. It was planned like a military operation. Purbright examined the implements with the appreciation due to superior workmanship. Each tool had been fashioned with attention to both function and durability, suggesting someone whose professional pride extended to activities that might not bear professional scrutiny. The soap and graphite mixture was particularly telling. a traditional locksmith's compound that indicated knowledge acquired through legitimate channels and applied to less legitimate purposes. Dr. Mortlake's analysis confirms these tools created the marks on the lock mechanism, Love continued, and the craft knife matches the drumhead incision exactly. We're dealing with someone whose technical knowledge is considerable. Indeed, Sergeant. And someone whose conscience proved more persistent than their criminal ambitions. Purbright considered the curious psychology that had driven such elaborate preparation for such modest reward. The question remains whether our craftsman's pride will prove stronger than his discretion. Mrs. Crampton's additional discovery had provided the final piece of their technical puzzle. The orange card bearing the rough sketch of the assembly rooms revealed systematic surveillance and careful timing, the work of someone who understood that successful mischief required proper reconnaissance. The penciled calculations of the fund's contents showed remarkable accuracy, suggesting weeks of patient observation. £3 estimated, Purbright read from the margin notes. Someone had been watching the collections with the dedication of a natural historian studying migratory patterns. The morning's consultations began with Mr. Delday, who arrived bearing samples of municipal stationery with the nervous energy of someone hoping that legitimate business might provide refuge from uncomfortable questions. His bandaged hand moved restlessly as he settled into the chair Purbright indicated, and his gaze kept returning to the tool roll with fascination and apprehension. Mr. Delday, we've discovered additional evidence about Tuesday evening's enterprise. A collection of precision tools that suggests considerable preparation and skill. Purbright gestured toward the implements with casual interest. The sort of craftsmanship that requires both technical knowledge and access to proper workshop facilities. Delday's reaction was immediate and revealing. His professional eye fixed on the tools with unmistakable appreciation, even as his face grew pale. Remarkable workmanship, he said quietly. Someone clearly understands metallurgy and precision construction, the sort of skills one might acquire through years of working with delicate mechanisms. Quite so. And the typewriter evidence suggests someone with regular access to municipal offices. The distinctive character flaws of the Council's Royal Standard are well known to anyone who has used it regularly. I've typed correspondence on that machine many times, Delday admitted, his voice carrying the careful precision of someone walking through a minefield. Committee reports, supply orders. The K has been troublesome for years, and the ribbon needs constant adjustment. Purbright allowed silence to settle, noting how Delday's gaze kept returning to the craft knife. The stationer's appreciation for the tool's quality was evident, but so was his growing awareness that such appreciation might be interpreted as familiarity. Mr. Haggerstone arrived with his characteristic confidence, surveying the evidence with the professional interest of someone assessing a particularly challenging repair job. His calloused hands examined the tools with evident admiration, and his comments revealed both technical knowledge and genuine respect for superior craftsmanship. "Exquisite work," he pronounced, turning the lock picks in the light. Someone clearly understands the principles of leverage and precision. The metallurgy alone would require considerable skill. These have been properly tempered and finished. You recognize the techniques involved? Naturally. Anyone who works with precision instruments learns to appreciate quality construction. The soap and graphite mixture is particularly interesting. Traditional locksmith's lubricant, properly prepared. Haggerstone's enthusiasm for technical excellence seemed to override any consideration of its criminal application. Though I must say, using such elaborate methods for a simple padlock seems rather like employing a surgeon to trim hedges. Purbright noted this observation with interest. Haggerstone's reaction was that of someone who valued efficiency above elegance, hardly the psychology of someone who would spend hours crafting precision tools for a £3 theft. The final consultation proved most illuminating. Mr. Bragg arrived with the patient, courtesy of someone accustomed to explaining municipal infrastructure to people who preferred not to understand it, but his composure began its gradual dissolution as soon as he observed the tool roll. "Professional quality equipment," he said quietly, his voice carrying a note that might have been admiration or recognition. "The sort of tools that require considerable time and skill to construct properly." "Indeed, Mr. Bragg." "And someone with regular access to municipal facilities would have both the opportunity to use such tools and the knowledge to plan their application effectively." Purbright watched carefully as Bragg's gaze moved from the implements to the typed note and back again. "The council's typewriter, yes. We use it occasionally for work orders and reports. Troublesome machine. The key stick and the ribbon is perpetually in need of adjustment." Bragg's hands moved restlessly, and Purbright noted that while the man's fingernails were clean, they bore the telltale stains of someone who worked regularly with paint and metal compounds. "Dr. Mortlake has confirmed that these tools were used Tuesday evening. The cut hand that resulted from their hasty use has been treated and is healing properly." Purbright's tone remained conversational, but his words carried unmistakable implication. Bragg's face, usually so composed, registered a complex mixture of resignation and relief. The careful facade of professional competence began to crack, revealing someone who had discovered that criminal enterprise required different skills than municipal maintenance. "Inspector," he said quietly, "I believe we should have a more detailed conversation about Tuesday evening's events." As Bragg's confession unfolded with the methodical precision that marked his approach to all technical problems, Purbright reflected on the curious psychology that had driven a competent foreman to such elaborate mischief. The motivation, it emerged, was less financial than philosophical. A long-standing grievance against what Bragg considered the frivolous waste of public funds on cultural amenities, while essential infrastructure received inadequate attention. The Orchestra Pit Fund represented everything wrong with municipal priorities, Bragg explained with the earnest conviction of someone who had spent years watching committees debate lighting improvements while drainage systems deteriorated. £3 for theatrical illumination, while the assembly room's heating system hasn't been properly maintained in a decade. The elaborate preparation, the precision tools, the careful surveillance, the systematic approach reflected Bragg's professional standards applied to unprofessional purposes. Even his criminal enterprise had been conducted with the methodical attention to detail that marked his legitimate work. "The conscience that compelled you to return the funds?" Purbright inquired mildly. "Discovered that theft, even for philosophical reasons, didn't suit my temperament," Bragg replied with rueful honesty. "The money belonged to people who believed in their cause, however misguided. Professional pride demanded proper completion of the job, including cleaning up after myself." As they concluded the formal procedures that would restore Bragg to respectability and the Orchestra Pit Fund to its modest dignity, Purbright reflected on the curious satisfaction that came from understanding human nature without being required to judge it too harshly. The tools of precision craftsmanship would find their way to the evidence room, but the man who had fashioned them with such care deserved recognition for both his skill and his ultimate honesty. Walking back through Flaxborough's quiet streets, Love consulted his notebook with the satisfaction of someone whose faith in systematic investigation had been vindicated. "A most unusual case, sir. Criminal enterprise conducted with professional standards and resolved through voluntary confession." "Indeed, Sergeant. Mr. Bragg approached theft with the same methodical precision he brought to municipal maintenance and discovered that some jobs are best left to others." Purbright paused beneath the town clock, which continued its reliable measurement of time that would eventually heal even the most carefully planned embarrassments. "The tools will make excellent evidence of premeditation," Love observed, "though I suspect the magistrate will be more impressed by the voluntary return of funds and the complete confession. Justice, Sergeant, often benefits more from human conscience than from legal procedure." Mr. Bragg's professional pride ultimately served the community better than his philosophical grievances. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Flaxborough's streets, and Purbright noted that the town was resuming its normal rhythm with the measured grace of a community that had learned to accommodate human folly without losing faith in eventual human decency. The assembly rooms stood with restored dignity, their modest collection tin once again serving its humble purpose under improved security arrangements that reflected both experience and optimism. Tomorrow would bring the formal resolution that would allow all parties to resume their proper roles in Flaxborough's ongoing experiment in municipal democracy. Tonight, the town could rest, with the satisfaction that came from understanding that even the most carefully planned mischief eventually yielded to the persistence of human conscience and the patient application of professional investigation. The case of the Orchestra Pit Fund would join the town's collection of minor scandals that had been resolved with appropriate dignity, another reminder that small communities, like Precision Instruments, functioned best when all their components understood both their capabilities and their limitations. Inspector Purbright spent the morning in that particular variety of contemplative quiet which served him better than most people's urgency. The case, which the town had gratefully declared concluded with Bragg's confession, possessed an aftertaste he found distinctly unsatisfying. Bragg's admission had the careful joints and neat corners of something constructed in a workshop, but Purbright suspected it fitted the opening provided by events with rather too much precision. He turned the matter gently, like testing an old key in a patient lock. The envelope of money had arrived before the rehearsal, yet the empty tin had appeared after. Either the same person had returned both contents and container in theatrical installments, an oddly dramatic habit for someone claiming philosophical motivation, or two hands had been at work, one repentant, the other seeking to educate the community through carefully staged revelation. Sergeant Love arrived bearing the expression of someone who had shepherded a modest revelation safely across busy traffic. From Mrs. Grope of Sebastopol Street, sir. She recalls that young Collins from Borough Works went out after 9 on Tuesday evening. Said he was stepping up to the rooms for the practice lights. She found it peculiar, as he's no singer and not on the society's membership rolls. Did she observe whether he carried anything? A cloth cap and a small canvas bag. His boots were newly polished, which she considered rather suspicious for evening employment. Purbright reflected on this intelligence with growing interest. The grey gull polish, the working clothes, the canvas bag, pieces that had been circling without quite settling into their proper constellation. By afternoon, he had arranged what he privately termed a small experiment in human nature. Through Mrs. Mortimer's enthusiastic cooperation, word had circulated that the principal parties would gather at 7 in the committee room for a brief discussion of improved security arrangements and proper acknowledgement of anonymous donors. Such announcements, he had learned, possessed remarkable ability to make guilty parties either exceptionally careful or dangerously careless. The committee room had assembled its familiar collection of Flaxborough worthies by the appointed hour. Mrs. Mortimer presided with notebook and municipal dignity, while Mr. Hopgood attended with the council's temperamental typewriter. Mr. Pegg hovered strategically near the door and doctor. Mortlake had been enticed by promises of orderly resolution. Messieurs, Delday, Haggerstone, and Bragg occupied chairs with the careful neutrality of men who had developed complicated relationships with official furniture. Purbright arranged his modest collection of evidence with ceremonial precision. The orange card fragment, the umbrella collar with its telltale screw marks, the delicate wire tool, and a sheet of county crown paper with its royal watermark, catching the light like a small confession. Ladies and gentlemen, he began with sufficient mildness to lower defenses. Recent events suggest our security arrangements invite demonstration of ingenuity by those with time and inclination for such exercises. Before investing in improvements that glow in the dark, perhaps we might test our collective wits on modest puzzles already solved. He lifted the orange wedge between finger and thumb. This fragment served admirably as a door wedge, though its theatrical coloring suggests origins in Mr. Delday's directional campaign. The paste residue indicates recent removal from its intended position. Someone selected it hastily because it lay conveniently to hand. Delday's gaze fixed on the fragment with uncomfortable recognition. The umbrella collar presents a different puzzle, Purbright continued conversationally. Someone removed this with more haste than skill, leaving us a screw in the ash bin. Mr. Haggerstone would certainly know to cushion such work with cloth to prevent scratching the brass. Haggerstone nodded automatically. Naturally. Wrong blade size would burr the edges something dreadful. You'd never seat it properly afterward. Quite so. And this delicate instrument, Purbright indicated the twisted wire, represents considerable craftsmanship and, I suspect, considerable pride. Dropped carelessly or in pain behind the skirting. Not mine, Bragg said quietly. Mine never left my pocket. Indeed. We've established that. Purbright smiled with faint benevolence. A community fortunate enough to possess two philosophers of security might reasonably expect a surfeit of specialized tools. He turned to the typewriter with apparent afterthought. Before formal consideration of improved locks, Mrs. Mortimer suggests we draft acknowledgement to our anonymous donors. Perhaps the Orchestra Pit Appeal Committee expresses gratitude and promises better security arrangements. Mrs. Mortimer beamed at the sentence's diplomatic precision. Mr. Delday, as your stationery has already served the cause, would you be so kind as to demonstrate the machine's capabilities? Mr. Haggerstone might provide his signature, authority among practical men, and Mr. Bragg a second to satisfy engineering sensibilities. The exercise proceeded without apparent drama. Delday approached the keys with practiced caution, coaxing cooperation from the troublesome K and spacing with printer's precision. Haggerstone signed with characteristic force, while Bragg added his name in workmanlike script. Purbright gathered the completed letter and held it to the light, noting the faint E and protesting capital K. He placed it beside the anonymous envelope, its flower dusting still faintly visible. County Crown paper maintains consistent quality, he observed mildly. And flour, Mrs. Mortimer. Thursday is scone day at Mrs. Shire's. She dusts her counter rather enthusiastically. And Tuesday, Miss Pollard, unable to restrain contribution, observed, Eccles cakes, I believe. I noticed the same powder on Mr. Delday's cuff yesterday morning. He was purchasing stamps for program distribution. The room inhaled collectively. Delday examined his sleeve as if it had betrayed confidences. Curious how correspondence routes tell stories, Purbright continued with academic interest. A man uses the council typewriter because that's where such machines live, addresses envelopes neatly because that's his nature, then leaves the result among baked goods while gathering courage for delivery to ladies who keep faithful notebooks. Delday stared at the table's wood grain as if it might offer explanation. Inspector, this grows rather unfair. Only as unfair as the way small objects tell truth despite good intentions. Nothing here desires your embarrassment. I merely ask questions of habits. This orange wedge, for instance. Convenient in color and firm enough for doors, but selected hastily because paste traces show recent wall removal. The umbrella collar, removed because you feared Mrs. Mortimer might recognize civic property. You possess an eye for reputation, Mr. Delday. It burdens shopkeepers particularly. Mr. Pegg, who had adopted neutrality as professional philosophy, gazed thoughtfully at Delday's bandage. Could have asked me for plaster, but people prefer bleeding privately. Delday produced a sound halfway between laugh and sigh. I never intended. It wasn't the money, Inspector. £3, 14 shillings seemed rather petty for decisive action. I typed the note because I couldn't bear facing people. But the drum represents Mr. Bragg's contribution, Purbright said with unexpected comfort. We share our theatre in Flaxborough, Mr. Delday. Even our mistakes prove cooperative. Relief and understanding circulated among the assembled company, each face selecting its appropriate portion of surprise, sympathy, or vindication. We needn't detain anyone further this evening, Purbright concluded, rising with ceremonial dignity. Tomorrow we'll install proper locks and consider whether orchestra pits and heating systems might both receive appropriate attention. Mr. Delday, I'll call at 10. Mr. Bragg, your conscience will prove valuable for securing troublesome doors. Mr. Haggerstone, your expertise with recalcitrant screws remains essential. As the gathering dispersed into Flaxborough's forgiving evening, Love allowed himself quiet satisfaction. Your test succeeded admirably, sir. Which test, Sergeant? Offering them opportunity to correct your assumptions. Ah, said Purbright, buttoning his coat against the gathering dusk. Pride, Sergeant. Superior to Archimedes' lever for moving human nature. We'll apply it to remaining consciences tomorrow and observe what shifts. The town clock chimed the hour with mechanical reliability, marking time that would eventually transform even carefully planned embarrassment into community memory, seasoned with appropriate forgiveness. The committee room had acquired that particular atmosphere of expectant civility which marked occasions when truth was about to be distributed with appropriate ceremony. Inspector Purbright had requested the presence of all interested parties, not for dramatic confrontation, but for the sort of quiet resolution that allowed small communities to transform embarrassment into wisdom without excessive damage to anyone standing in the Thursday afternoon queue at the post office. Mrs. Mortimer presided with notebook and municipal dignity, while the assembled worthies arranged themselves with the careful neutrality of people who understood that public revelations required proper witnesses. Mr. Delday occupied his chair with the resigned dignity of someone who had discovered that elaborate deception proved more exhausting than simple honesty. Mr. Haggerstone attended with toolbox and professional curiosity, while Mr. Bragg bore the patient expression of someone who expected to be disagreed with by people who had never calculated the cost of proper drainage. Young Collins from Borough Works sat near the door with the nervous energy of someone who had spent several sleepless nights discovering that conscience proved more persistent than criminal ambition. His working clothes bore honest stains, but his manner suggested someone who had developed complicated feelings about municipal property. Ladies and gentlemen, Purbright began with sufficient mildness to suggest that justice might prove compatible with dignity. Tuesday evening's events demonstrate that Flaxborough possesses citizens willing to invest considerable effort in civic improvement, though their methodologies occasionally require official guidance. He arranged the evidence with ceremonial precision. The orange wedge, the umbrella collar with its telltale screw marks, the delicate wire tool, and the craft knife that had performed surgery on the bass drum with surgical precision. This orange fragment served admirably as a door wedge, though its theatrical coloring suggests origins in Mr. Delday's directional campaign. The paste residue indicates recent removal from its intended position. Someone selected it hastily because it lay conveniently to hand during an evening when convenience mattered more than aesthetics. Delday's gaze fixed on the fragment with uncomfortable recognition. The umbrella collar presents a different puzzle, Purbright continued conversationally. Someone removed this with more haste than skill, leaving us a screw in the ash bin. The brass bears scratches that suggest improper tools. Mr. Haggerstone would certainly know to cushion such work with cloth to prevent damage. Naturally, Haggerstone nodded automatically. Wrong technique entirely. You'd never seat it properly afterward. And this delicate instrument, Purbright indicated the twisted wire, represents considerable craftsmanship and, I suspect, considerable pride. Dropped carelessly behind the skirting when pain proved a distraction from proper tool management. Young Colin stared at his hands as if expecting them to provide additional testimony. The sequence, as I understand it, began with Mr. Bragg's philosophical objections to municipal priorities. The orchestra pit fund represented everything wrong with council spending, while essential infrastructure received inadequate attention. Purbright's tone carried no judgment, merely the patient interest of someone accustomed to human complexity. Bragg straightened slightly. The heating system hasn't been properly maintained in years, Inspector. Yet committees debate lighting improvements for theatrical performances. It seemed instructive to demonstrate how easily their security arrangements could be circumvented. Your tools reflect considerable preparation and skill. The lockpicks were fashioned with genuine craftsmanship, the sort of precision that requires both technical knowledge and professional pride. I took time with them, Bragg admitted with reluctant satisfaction. If something's worth doing, it's worth doing properly. Even unauthorized activities deserve proper equipment. Young Collins provided practical assistance, I believe. Collins twisted his cap with careful attention. Mr. Bragg explained about municipal priorities, sir. Seemed reasonable when he put it that way. I helped with the reconnaissance, teaming, access routes, that sort of thing. Used my borough works knowledge to plan the approach. The grey gull polish, the working clothes observed by Miss Pollard, the canvas bag containing borrowed tools, all part of your contribution to Mr. Bragg's philosophical demonstration. Yes, sir. Though the actual execution proved more complicated than theory suggested. Purbright turned to Delday with gentle interest. Your involvement began when you discovered the aftermath of their enterprise, Mr. Delday. The empty tin, the blood, the abandoned tools, evidence of an operation that had not proceeded entirely according to plan. Delday's relief was visible. I went back to collect my program proofs and found, well, the obvious signs of what had occurred. I recognized Mr. Bragg's craftsmanship in the tools, and I knew people would suspect me because of Mrs. Tither's comments about my financial difficulties. So you decided to manage the situation. I thought if I returned the money promptly and anonymously, it would demonstrate community responsibility while avoiding unnecessary scandal. I used the council typewriter because it was available and untraceable to me personally. And the theatrical return of the empty tin? That was Mr. Haggerstone's contribution, Delday said with evident relief at sharing responsibility. He found me cleaning the tin in the committee room and insisted that simple return wasn't sufficient. Said the community needed a demonstration about security inadequacies. Haggerstone's professional pride was clearly engaged. The drum presentation seemed appropriately instructive. People respond better to dramatic demonstrations than to written reports about security deficiencies. Purbright allowed silence to settle, noting how each participant had contributed their particular skills to create a complex sequence that satisfied no one's original objectives while providing considerable education about community cooperation. So we have Mr. Bragg's philosophical motivation and technical expertise, Mr. Colin's practical assistance and local knowledge, Mr. Delday's reputation management and administrative skills, and Mr. Haggerstone's theatrical instincts and mechanical knowledge. A remarkable collaboration, though entirely unplanned. Mrs. Mortimer, who had been taking notes with secretarial precision, looked up with evident satisfaction. The committee has voted to divide future collections between orchestra pit improvements and essential building maintenance. We've also approved enhanced security arrangements throughout the building. The resolution satisfied everyone's need for appropriate consequences without destroying anyone's prospects for continued respectability. Bragg and Collins would contribute their professional skills to improve security installations, while Delday would handle the society's printing needs at cost. Haggerstone's theatrical expertise would be properly channeled into legitimate stage management. As the gathering dispersed into Flaxborough's forgiving afternoon, Purbright reflected on the curious satisfaction that came from understanding human nature without being required to judge it too harshly. 4 men with different motivations and complementary skills had somehow managed to transform a simple theft into an elaborate lesson in civic cooperation. "A most educational case, Sergeant," he observed to Love as they walked back through the town's quiet streets. Criminal enterprise conducted with such elaborate preparation that it became indistinguishable from community improvement. "The tools will find more legitimate employment in future municipal projects, sir." "Indeed. Mr. Bragg's craftsmanship deserves recognition for both its quality and its ultimate service to community security." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Flaxborough's streets, and Purbright noted that the town was resuming its normal rhythm with the measured grace of a community that had learned to accommodate human folly without losing faith in eventual human decency. The assembly room stood with restored dignity, their collection arrangements now serving as a model of security that other civic organizations might profitably emulate. By evening, the Operatic Society had resumed rehearsals with renewed enthusiasm, the bass drum properly repaired, and the orchestra pit fund secure behind Mr. Haggerstone's improved lock. The town clock chimed the hour with mechanical reliability, marking time that would eventually transform even the most elaborate embarrassments into community memory, seasoned with appropriate forgiveness. Inspector Purbright, with a cup of station tea that no one would describe as restorative, completed his report in sentences that avoided flourish while preserving the essential dignity of all concerned parties. He did not record that people often revealed more about themselves when attempting to be helpful than when striving for simple honesty, or that small communities required occasional demonstrations of both human fallibility and human conscience to maintain their proper balance. The case of the orchestra pit fund would join Flaxborough's collection of minor scandals resolved with appropriate ceremony, another reminder that even the most carefully planned mischief eventually yielded to the patient application of community expectations and the persistent influence of human decency properly guided. The end.